Hi there, I'm Frank Tate with Gulfsoft Consulting, and today I'm going to show you how to install Rancher with Elasticsearch and Kibana in a single Docker container on Ubuntu desktop. In this video, I'm going to be running several commands, and I've included all those commands in a GitHub gist that can be found under my profile, the link to which is shown right now, and there'll be a link to the gist itself in the description down below. In dealing with anything related to Kibana, the versions are extremely important, and that's because things are changing quite often. So the versions that I'm specifically going through today are listed on the screen. They're Ubuntu 20.04, Docker 23.0.1, Rancher 2.7.1, and Elasticsearch and Kibana versions 8.5.1. One example of how it becomes important is Elasticsearch in recent versions, I'm not sure which one, started requiring TLS encryption and user authentication. And so a lot of videos you'll see out there that are talking about earlier versions don't include that configuration, and it just causes things to fail if you try to reproduce the examples that are shown. So that's why I'm specifying the specific versions right here. It could also be that in the future, the steps in this video don't quite work. That's just how it goes. So with that said, we will start getting stuff done. To start with, I'll show you a little bit about how my Ubuntu environment is configured. So I created an administrative user named GCUser. My host name for Ubuntu is test Ubuntu, and it's actually a virtual machine running on ESXi version 6.7. The important thing for the stuff we're going to run here is that my ID is in the Docker group, and that's the primary group. I'm also in the sudo group, so I can run commands, but we will not be running very many commands from here. It'll just be starting up Rancher and then logging into that Docker container. But that's what we have. And again, all of the commands that I'm going to run, I'll have in the gist in the description. The first thing I'm going to do is start up Rancher. This is going to be pretty much the easiest thing that we go through here. So in my Ubuntu desktop, I have a Firefox browser open, and this is the gist that I'm going to be copying commands from and pasting in here. I'm going to do this so that you don't have to watch me type and have a lot of typos. But this Docker command is pretty normal, except that the addition that I put in here for this video is to add port 5601. So the Docker container is going to be listening on ports 80 HTTP, 443 for HTTPS, and that's where Rancher, we're going to access Rancher, and then 5601. And the reason for that is so that we can access the Kibana UI. Without this, I couldn't find a way to access the Kibana UI any kind of way. We'll also have another setting a little bit later to allow that. But just going to hit enter on this command, and in my environment, I've already run this command, so it already downloaded the image, so it starts up pretty quickly. You will have a similar experience. It may take a little bit longer, but really it just spins up a container using a Rancher image, and it starts up really very quickly. Now, what we're going to do is go to the Rancher home page on our box, and that's just at HTTP localhost, which will redirect you to HTTPS localhost. And so it is still setting up, and there we go. It just took a little while to get everything going. But at HTTPS localhost, it's displaying a certificate that we haven't trusted, which is fine. You just need to click Advanced and accept the risk and continue. And this guy is going to go, and there we go. So it's got a couple of things in here. It tells us, or just one thing for our Docker install, how to get the container ID and the bootstrap password, which is the password we're going to have to put down here. Now, in my gist, I have a couple of commands that are slightly different where I want to store the container ID. And so I'll echo it out. Echo container ID, that's in the output of Docker PS that it grabs it from is this guy. So we have the container ID, and then we want to get the password, the bootstrap password, to put into the Rancher UI. And so I'm going to echo that orig Rancher pass, and it's this long guy. So I'm going to copy it and then come back over to the Rancher UI. I'm going to paste it in here and log in with the local user. And this password we don't want to save because it's just the bootstrap password. But what it does is it tells us the password it's generating. If you want to set one that's easier, you can do that. I don't care. So I'm just going to copy this guy. And I'm going to set it as the Rancher pass. So export Rancher pass equals, and I don't know why I did that. So I'm going to copy here and then right click to paste, and there we go. So we have Rancher pass stored and that guy, and then we accept the end user license agreement, and it's saving everything. One thing I did want to note is that my Ubuntu VM, I have 16 cores and 64 gig of RAM. I think that's overkill for this, but that's what I have allocated to it. This is the default page that comes up. It allows you to install logging, which we're not going to do in this case, but it has taken us to our local cluster. If I go to the Rancher home, because Rancher is a container orchestrator, it will allow you to manage multiple Kubernetes clusters. It actually created a local K3s cluster here inside my Docker container, the Docker container that I created with the Docker run command. It's got a K3s cluster, and K3s is a very minimal Kubernetes distribution that's used for development environment purposes. It was written by Suzy, which is also the company that wrote Rancher, so it makes sense that they're using K3s. So I'm going to click inside this local cluster, and I have my dashboard. This dashboard shows me that I have 9 pods used, 1 node. There have been 5 deployments. Just a bunch of stuff. It's Rancher. So what we want to do is a couple of things to get ready. Specifically, we want to log into the container that was created. And I have the command in the gist again, and it's just docker exec -it, container ID, and then bin bash. So notice the prompt changed, and the host name is the ID of the Docker container. In here, I am root, so I can do anything I need to, and I have access to things like the kubectl command, which we're going to be using a lot in here to manage our Kubernetes cluster. The first thing we need to do is create a physical volume that's going to be used by Elasticsearch. So we create a directory that's going to be mapped to a physical volume. So I'm going to make the directory /home/ftpv1, and then I'm going to change the ownership of that to Rancher, because that's the user that's going to be creating everything inside this environment. So just going to set the owner to Rancher. So now that that's set up, I can come back to the Rancher GUI and create the physical volume. There isn't one now, but I am going to go to create, and I just need to give it a name. I'm going to call it ftpv1. It doesn't need to be the same as the name of the directory on disk. That's just what I'm naming it. Specify the volume plugin as host path, and the capacity is going to be 30 gigabytes. I created my Ubuntu virtual machine with 200 gigabytes of disk space, so there's plenty of room. And this 30 actually is what Elasticsearch defaults to, and so I'm just going to set this here so I don't need to change that default when we go to install Elasticsearch. But then I need to specify the path to the directory, the path on the node, and it is home/ftpv1. And I'm going to create that guy. So now that I have that created, I'm going to come over to apps in the navigator, and I'm going to search for Elasticsearch. And I have that guy here, so I'm going to click on Elasticsearch, and it shows me the version that's going to be installed. I have an option to install an older one, but I'm going to go with this, and I'm going to click Install. I am going to change a few of the defaults here. The namespace, I'm going to specify create a new namespace named ES, and I am going to select Customize Helm Options before install, and then click Next. And in the YAML file, I need to make two changes. One is going to be for the minimum master nodes. I need to set that to 1, and I also need to set the number of replicas to 1. And there we go, replicas. Set this to 1. And this is just for development purposes. This is what we're going to do. If you try to create a cluster using the defaults, it's going to fail. So we set those two things, minimum number of master nodes and replicas. We set both of those to 1. We can set things like Java flags, like to set minimum heap size and maximum heap size, things like that. But we're just going to use the defaults to get this thing going. And down here for the volume claim, this is where that 30 gigabytes comes in. That's why we specified 30 when we created the physical volume. And I'm going to click Next and leave those defaults with a timeout of 10 minutes. It's going to take a little while to run this stuff, but I'm going to run kubectl get pods -a, show you the pods that are there right now. And because it hadn't started yet, we don't see any of the Elastic pods. One thing to note is Helm is not installed in the container. Type Helm. It's not installed in the container, but Rancher somehow, every time it wants to run Helm operations, it spins up a container to run those Helm operations. Kind of neat. Not sure exactly how it does it, but that's what happens. If we run get pods -a again, what we'll see is we have a new namespace, and Elasticsearch master 0 is the pod that's coming up. And it's in the initialization stage right now. And we can see that this guy is checking on the status of it. And in the list of commands, I do have commands you can run to get more information about the pods that are running. So kubectl describe. And we can see everything that it pulled the image that it needs, and it looks like it started. We can get the pods in the ES namespace, and we see that it's running. And so now that it's running, we can actually look at the logs of that pod, and we can see that it is doing stuff, all of the stuff that it needs to. Coming back to the Rancher UI, it is still not ready. We'll just look at the logs again. And normally this is the last message that it writes before it's actually up and ready. So we should see, there we go, success in the GUI. So we have successfully installed Elasticsearch at this point. Now that we've installed Elasticsearch, we can test it out. So we have a couple of commands. What we need to do is we'll get the Elastic password for the user Elastic so that we can do stuff with it. So we're going to get the password into the ESPass environment variable, and then to echo it out, echo ESPass, and we can see what that guy is. And it's just stored in a secret. So just have the commands here so I can copy and paste them. And what we want to do now is port forward so that we can actually access Elasticsearch. Before running port forward, the port 9200 is only available from within the cluster, not outside of it. And this one container is officially outside of the K3's cluster. So we need to run port forward so that we can get to port 9200 on the Elasticsearch pod, which is registered as a service in Kubernetes. So and we can see that with a kubectl get svc -A, and you'll see in the ES namespace we have Elasticsearch-master. So now we can use curl to check on the status of Elasticsearch. And this command requires that we use --insecure. The -vvv is verbose, which I always normally like to use with curl. But we have to provide the user ID and password. And since TLS is required, we want to set insecure because we don't have any of the certificates set up in this Docker container. And what we'll see is that everything shows that it's running. Shows its name, all that kind of good stuff. And we can look at the indices, and there won't be any right now. Going to have to put this in double quotes. The indices are found at _cat/indices $V and pretty. And the ampersand is why we have to put this in double quotes. And we can see here, this is the actual output where it's showing that there are no indices. And if we leave off the VVV, we'll see that's just what comes back. And this handling connection for 9200, that output comes from the port forward command that's running in the background right now. So what we see is just no indices currently, but we can put some test or dummy data in there. So I'm going to edit a file, estest.sh, and in there I'm going to insert commands that I have again in the gist, the link to which is in the description. I'm going to paste these guys in here. Cool. And it's just running the same curl command multiple times, just with a new date each time. And yeah, so I'm going to run shell -x estest.sh. And I see that it looks like everything's successful. Yeah, successful 1, failed 0. Have that for each one of these guys. And if I go back to my curl statement, looking at the indices, I have a new index named my documents. And that came from the curl commands that were run, where the URL that we went to was /mydocuments/_doc. So that created a new index. And we'll see this data in Kibana once we get it installed and access its UI. So to install Kibana, we go back to the Rancher UI and go back to charts under apps. And I'm going to delete this little pane at the bottom of the window and search for Kibana. And there we go. And we're going to install it in the ES namespace. ES, and everything else is going to be the defaults. This won't take quite as long as Elasticsearch. I'm going to click install, and then it's got to think about things. There we go. And I'm going to run get pods in the ES namespace. And we see it's got container creating. We can get the logs for it. And the logs are going to be, oh, sorry, this is the pre-install Kibana pod, which is just some stuff that runs before the Kibana pod is actually created. So we're going to go back to get pods, and I will clean up this command line so we don't have to look at that every time. And it's going through, and that completed. And now it's actually running the Kibana pod. So we can look at the logs here. So we look at the logs, and it's still not quite doing anything yet. So it's still getting spun up. We can do a describe pod, but as soon as we do that, it's going to start showing us logs, and that's what it's doing. So we see the logs, and it's running, doing a whole bunch of stuff. Look at the status again. It's not in the ready state yet, so it's still spinning up. And the Rancher UI will tell us once it is ready. I just like looking at the logs to see what's going on, as opposed to just seeing that it's waiting in the Rancher UI. But there we go. It shows that it is completed. here in the Rancher UI. It shows that it's installed and running. So the next thing we need to do, and this is the important step, is we need to port forward to port 5601. And we need to do it in a very specific way. We need to specify --address 0.0.0.0. Without this part, it just fails in any attempt to try to get to the UI. So we're gonna run this to forward to the Kibana service, and we have success. It's forwarding now to port 5601, and so I can come over to my browser and go to HTTPS, or it should be HTTP localhost 5601. I just created the wrong bookmark. So it's HTTP localhost 5601. And it's looking good. There we go. So for the password, where it is the ESPass environment variable that we stored a little earlier. And we're going to copy this guy and paste it in here and make sure it's the same. It is. And we will log in. I'll update. And this new Kibana is a little bit different, just some of the terminology, and we'll see that in a little bit, but we still need to go to stack management. Yeah, we can go about it a couple of ways, but we'll go here. We'll first look at index management to see the indices, and we see the My Documents index. We can see if there are any data streams. There aren't. The only thing we have, other than the hidden indices, which are there, is the My Documents index. And what we need to do to be able to see this is create a data view, which is new in some version of 8.x Kibana. So the name is whatever you want, and the index pattern just needs to be a value that matches the index that we created with our test data. And the timestamp field is post_date. That's what we included in our little bit of JSON data. And we're going to save this guy. And then we can go to Analytics, Discover, and we'll be able to see we have our data view here, and we see the data that we sent in via curl. And there we go. It's not much, not too exciting, but it took me a while to get to this point. Really, the port forwarding with the -- address was the key to get this to finally working in my environment. So I plan to make some more videos. I've done some stuff with Minikube, and then there's also within this environment setting up metric beat and logging and possibly Logstash, all kinds of stuff. But I hope you enjoyed it. You can check out our website, www.gulfsoft.com, for all kinds of things. And we have a blog at blog.gulfsoft.com with lots of interesting tidbits. But hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions, and I'll answer it as soon as I can. Thanks a lot.